No,
I didn't hear anybody get too excited.
It's live.
We're good to go.
I think so. Bill, it says it's streaming.
Yeah. We're good.
At this time, I would like to start our special meeting for the Board of Education for the purpose of approving economic development, acknowledgement, waiver, support, and school donation agreements with Aqua Bounty Farms, Ohio, LLC. Calling Pledge of Allegiance first. Let's get this one.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Call the roll, please.
Lee,
Here.
Anthony,
Here.
Homer,
Here.
Tim,
Here.
Shane.
Here.
Any items for board members? Mrs. Megan, will you please present?
Yeah, thank you guys for accommodating me this evening. I really appreciate it as we move this project forward. I do have a presentation that Bill will share with you all that will kind of guide us through. I promise I'll try to stay on time. There's a lot of information to get through though, so I want to make sure we get you all the answers that you need before we vote on this. So we'll go ahead and get this up. So with me this evening as well, Kira Grandy, she's the new ED assistant. She started in the midst of the pandemic, so wanted to bring her out with me to see how this all works when we have a tax abatement and introduce you guys to her because you'll be communicating with her at some point as well. So today I'm just going to go through, kind of want to give us a little agenda, company brief introduction, the scope of the project, talk about the building, location, and the jobs associated with this. Talk about the actual enterprise zone, the process of it, and this is more for people viewing this to understand how the process really works. I mean, none of this is done in secret, so I really wanted to be able to explain this to anyone watching this evening. We'll talk about the application and the agreement itself, lots of fun legal stuff, and then we'll go into the good details of the estimates of what does this mean for North Central schools. And then I'll have time for any questions that you guys may have, but I'll cover a lot of details for you, so hopefully you don't have very many questions. So we'll go on to the next slide, please. If you click one more, I put in a transition for fun. So just a quick project overview. So the company actually began this site search. I felt like this was really important to talk to you guys about because there's been some misinformation out there. So the site search for this third farm for the company actually began through our partners at the state of Ohio level with RGP, the Regional Growth Partnership, in the April of 2020. So we get a project name code, we're given some basic details, basic utility requirements, the investment numbers, what that looks like, and we're asked if we have any assets that match. If we do, we complete a request for information, an RFI, and that kind of kickstarts your process for the company investigating properties. So I wanted to kind of give that background. So they narrowed down the site list to the top 5 sites in April, May of 2020. So pretty quickly after we started that RFI process, and Pioneer was one of the top 5 at that time. So they began reviewing those top 3 sites, and we had a site visit in July of 2020 where all the head honchos came out to Williams County. We actually went physically out to the site, and they began due diligence on 2 sites because it's a very intense process for a $200 million project. So Pioneer moved to the top of the due diligence list, but obviously we've seen it out there. They announced Kentucky, they announced it too soon. They realized it wasn't the perfect match for them, which brought them back to Pioneer. But really, I mean, the final decision isn't made till a couple weeks before the actual announcement goes out. It's a very intense process. It's just like that for every single company. No project set in stone until you see a shovel in the ground and the building going up. So always keep that in mind in the process. Now, this is kind of a unique situation where the fact that the due diligence isn't quite finished yet, the company has been very transparent about that. We can see the finish line and we're almost there, but it just takes time. That's economic development. You have to have patience for this. So we understand it's still in progress, still working through that, but we do see the light and we're keeping things moving forward to help make this investment happen and land in Pioneer. So kind of the project itself. So the company, Aqua Bounty Technologies, plans to invest over $200 million in a 479,000 square foot facility, which is one of the largest, would be one of the largest in Williams County. And that facility will produce 10,000 metric tons of salmon a year. The company is currently headquartered in Massachusetts, and they have 2 existing facilities. Now, the one facility is in Canada. That's where they produce the eggs. That's where they do their R&D work. It's been around for about 30 years. Their second facility is in Albany, Indiana, which is about 3 hours away from here. That produces about 1,200 metric tons per year. In May of 2021, they sold out their first harvest there. It was wonderful for them. And this facility in Pioneer is going to produce 8 times the amount of fish. Now, it's very hard to imagine that much fish in that many tanks in the facility. But to give you some additional perspective and understanding about the company, they sound like a big corporate company, $200 million, so you don't see that happen every day. But it's not. It's a small company. They currently only have 80 employees total. If they're from up and down, they have 80 employees. So this is a really massive undertaking for a really small team. The core team that we're working with, the CFO, the CEO, we work hand in hand with these folks. So it's a lot of work on a few people. So keeping that in mind is we don't have answers right now sometimes, but that's because there's a lot of people doing a lot of work behind the scenes. So at full capacity at the Pioneer facility, they plan on employing 112 people with an annual payroll of over $5.4 million, which makes if you break it down, the cumulative average annual wage is just under $49,000. So these are quality jobs that require different skill sets. And that's something I really want to emphasize, that this is not the same as our traditional manufacturing that we are fortunate to have a lot of in Williams County. These are going to require different skill sets that we don't necessarily have the jobs in Williams County for these skill sets, like biology and veterinary. How many biologists stick around in this area? They move away because they can't find a job here. So this is kind of a unique attraction piece for jobs. It's a lot different than what we're used to in Williams County. And when it comes to hiring, they don't need 112 people day one. That's kind of one of the misconceptions out there. This is 112 people over a 3-year period after the construction. So like year 1 this year, they hire 1 person. Next year, they hire 2 people. It's a very gradual process. In 2023, the breakdown is 46 new employees. 2024, you'll have 31. 2025, it's hard thinking that far ahead, another 32 employees. So it's really, when you break it down in those smaller amounts, that's something that is feasible in our community. 112 at once, that's a lot. And a lot of employers are struggling, but that's anywhere you go nationally. That's not unique to Williams County. So hiring is to be completed, like I said, 3 years after the completion of construction. That's standard practice for a lot of projects we work on. So we'll go ahead and move on to the next slide. So I only wanted to touch briefly on the product itself. I'm not the expert on the product. I think you all know that. I'm the economic development expert, but just to touch on their product a little bit, as you all know, it's GMO salmon. Now, there's a lot of stereotypes that come in mind when you think of GMO, but it's way more common than what people realize. Almost everything we eat is genetically modified in some way, whether it's cross-pollination, cross-breeding of animals. I mean, it's very common. But one thing I did want to point out, if you haven't looked at the history of this company, this is a one-time genetic crossbreeding that happened 30 years ago. So it's not like it's happening all the time and, fish with 3 eyes, that's just not true. It's just a traditional salmon. They do grow faster. That's one of the reasons where they did the crossbreeding. So these grow in an 18-month period rather than a 3-year period. So that's more efficient to grow the fish and process them and get them out to market and create some more sustainable food source. Develops a lot quicker. Something else I want to point out the fish, that they put this everywhere, but there's still some misunderstanding, but they've never used in 30 years any antibiotics on their product. Kind of interesting. I don't really think about that when I eat food, but they really push that. They don't use that because they care so much about the water quality, the environment that these fish live in, their fish haven't gotten sick. In the history of the 30 years they've been doing this, their fish haven't gotten sick. And yes, you might have a fish die, just like in human life. Sometimes you might lose one along the way, but they do have a process and they do have plans. How do you remove that from the rest of them? How do you manage that? They're not going to throw dead fish outside. It's kind of funny, some of the things we've had to talk about, but they do have a plan of, if they have a dead fish, they have a process that they do. They remove it. They have a mechanism that basically, it's almost like cremation, when you make it biodegradable and you can use that material wherever. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. It's almost like cremation, but of a fish. You don't throw the skeletons outside. It's kind of funny, some of the things we've heard. But another important item I wanted to point out about the product itself, one of the common questions we had was, what if the fish escape? The fish have never escaped in 30 years of any of their facilities, for one. The fish are sterile, so they can't crossbreed with anything they come in contact with. I mean, it's not possible. And then they also have, and we talked a bit about this in the webinar that we had with the company, but there's multiple barriers put into the facility that actually prevent an egg or a fish, whatever size it may be, prevent them from escaping. They have different netting mechanisms, different things in their water systems that they've thought about those things. It's a very thorough process of, okay, how do we prevent this from ever happening? What are all the scenarios? And they have plans for those. So I know it's a lot of information to take in at once, and we do have, as I said just a little bit ago, we had a town hall just a couple weeks ago where the company really dived into almost for 2 hours about the project. They answered questions, very thorough information. So if you'd like to learn more, that is on our website. But then also, if you have questions about their product, even if you think it's silly, come to me and I'll ask the CEO. I mean, that's something, we have very open lines of communication, and we love questions. We can get the answers, even if you think it's silly. They've seen it all and heard it all, and they don't mind just sharing information. But we'll go on to the next slide, talk a little bit about the exact location itself. So it's not very far from here, which is kind of good if we develop a relationship and you can send kids there at some point. So you'll see in here, the red outline is Toledo to Lanai, just to give you guys some perspective since you're from here. And then that pink line, that's about a 2,700-foot public road extension. That's something we've been working for. As we've seen recently, we are applying for CDBG funds with the county. This is standard practice for a lot of projects. We're able to leverage the jobs, leverage that investment to get public funding for a public roadway. I think that's very important to emphasize. And it also opens up, yes, it does serve the site, but it also opens up all of that additional acreage, which we're setting ourselves up for success for future investments by opening that up that acreage with that roadway. So one thing that's not pictured on here, so that's a 479,000 square foot facility. There will be a water treatment plant on site. The company mentioned this briefly. We don't have the renderings yet because there's still work being done on that, but yes, there will be a water treatment plant on site. So that water quality, again, is very, very important to them. And when it's cleaned, making it clean to go out. Chances are the water is probably going to be cleaner going out than coming in because they take it very seriously. But when it comes to the facility, couple of things common questions we've got that I just wanted to address with you all. This isn't like the greenhouse in Delta. We've had some people say, is this going to be really, really lit up? No, it's not going to be like the lights in Fulton County that we all are very familiar with. There's not going to be a glow for miles around the facility. It's going to be a normal building with walls and have normal security lighting. And there'll be a fence around the property as well. Number two, no, it will not smell like fish. It's not going to smell like fish, but that's something that they feel is very important because they want to be a good neighbor. So if something were to change, that's something that's on their radar all the time. If they would notice something, to mitigate any problems, it's always on their radar, even though in all of their experiences, it has never smelled like fish outside of the building. Number three, we've had some questions about the pond that's located, as we'll see in the next picture here in a second. There's a retention pond outside the facility. This is kind of standard. There's not going to be fish swimming in the pond. That's a good thing. It's just a normal retention pond because we're building nearly a 500,000 square foot facility. You need that. So we'll go on and go to the next slide. This is pretty cool. This is something that the company just finished up just in time for our webinar, but it's an actual rendering of what the facility is going to look like. You see in that second picture, you know, it's going to look like a bunch of tanks inside a building. But these tanks are huge. And we're working on, the company's working on getting the information for me. They're kind of trying to do the math around this of how much water is actually going to be in a facility every day, because it's a lot more than what we can imagine. So they're working on getting that number for me. So I don't have it this evening, but that's something that I've said, hey, we need to know this. And they said, okay, we're going to work on getting that for you because they are a big water user. We do know this, but the due diligence is in place for a reason. Their goals are to meet, if not exceed, any regulatory requirements that there are. Because they want to be a good neighbor. They want to succeed in this community. They don't want to hurt any community that they're in. So they take the due diligence very, very seriously. And it is under a lot of scrutiny, but that's not a bad thing because they care about it. They care about their product lives and that's the environment of these fish. So it's very, very important. Now I want to just touch on just briefly, this slide actually came directly from the company. But I kept it on there because I wanted to touch on kind of the job types because as we talked about a little earlier, they are a little bit different. So we understand, we can't avoid this conversation. We understand that everyone's struggling for employment. You can't avoid that anywhere you go. But it's a national problem and the company really understands that. Just like any other company that makes an announcement, they have to figure out what they're going to do as a private employer to attract employees. Same with anyone. So one thing that helps them stand apart, however, is their willingness to partner with others. They have very strong partnerships over in Indiana with the surrounding technical centers, with their colleges, with their local schools, and they're eager to get those partnerships set up here as well. They have a pretty open policy, but doing it in a secure way that's healthy for their environment, healthy for the fish is also important. So just want to keep in mind that these jobs, as we see here, are somewhat different than our manufacturing sector. And I think that's not a bad thing. That's a good workforce attraction tool. We have a lot of jobs in this region that, you know, they're pretty similar in their skill sets, but this company offers a unique set of skill sets that we don't have a ton of jobs of in the region. So honestly, that's a competitive advantage that they have going for them. So we're very excited that we're having different job types. You know, you're going to need people, I mean, thinking of fish and the environment, you're going to need people with those biology degrees and veterinary skills. You have to want to work with fish. That's number one. So they're going to attract a different type of person. And there's been a lot of people, I mean, personally, that I have a sister who moved away from Northwest Ohio because there were no jobs in biology. That's what her degree's in. So she got a job in Cleveland. Well, had there been a job that needed that degree here, she would have stayed for family and stayed for a good job. So we're kind of excited to see where this goes, where we have these different types of good paying jobs in the area. So we've actually had already a couple different schools from outside of our county reach out to ask about partnerships and what they can do to help with the skill sets that are going to be an upcoming need for this company. So really exciting to hear that company or schools from other counties reaching out to see how they can get engaged. And we're very excited. We'll keep you guys in the loop as well because they want to be a partner with their local school. So that's one of the things we've talked about very early on with this company. They were we talked about that the first time we were able to meet in person. So very excited on that. Now I'm going to dive into quickly. I'll go into the next slide.
Next slide.
Yes. We'll go a little bit into the enterprise zone process and the agreement. This is more for anyone watching to understand the process because we've had a lot of questions about this, about how the process works, a lot of misunderstandings about how the process works. So I wanted to take a moment to clarify and kind of show you step by step what the process is, and also dive into those key items that are in the agreement so you don't have to read it over because it's 6 pages of legal jargon, which is fun. So I wanted to break it down into a digestible format for you guys and for anyone watching. So to start off, the company first has to submit an application to the enterprise zone manager. For a lot of people who don't know it, I'm the enterprise zone manager for Williams County. So anyone who gets a tax abatement from the Williams County Enterprise Zone Program, it has to go through me. No mayor, no village, no political entity can just give someone a tax abatement. There's no truth to that. That's not how the process works. This is statute of the Ohio Revised Code, that we're following all these procedures. So it's very important people realize that no one can just give a tax abatement under the radar without anybody knowing. And understanding there's terms to these tax abatements, they don't last forever. So as I said, step one, going through the application process between the enterprise zone manager and the company. And then we take some time, we do an internal review of the enterprise zone agreement. We start working on the drafts of all the upcoming documents. When we get to the point where we have everything, balls rolling, everything's set in stone, that's when we reach out to our school districts, our technical school and our local school district to give them that formal notification. And we give them the donation agreement and all that good stuff. So after that, in this process specifically, we actually met with Fort County last Thursday. They approved the agreement unanimously. We're here this evening. So then there's a short waiting period that we have to follow in here as well. That's more of the technical side of how this process works. And then we go to the Village Pioneer. Council approves or denies any agreement. We move on to the next step, which is going to the county commissioners. They see everything. They see all the approvals. They hear the same spiel that you guys are getting. They move the agreement forward, and then we package everything up and we submit it to the Ohio Department of Development for further review. But something I really want to point out here is that this isn't a one and done 7 steps. You get your tax abatement and you're free. This is for the life of the agreement. You're going to have to work with the enterprise zone manager. It's constant communication between the company, the enterprise zone manager, and that subsequent communication between the legislative entities and the school entities. So after that execution of the agreement, there's annual compliance that has to be followed through the formal process of the tax incentive review. Again, this is established through the Ohio Revised Code, and we've really beefed up our efforts in the past 6 years of, we take this process very seriously. If companies are in compliance or not, because if a company is found not to be in compliance, you can get your tax abatement revoked and you can be no longer eligible for any tax abatement moving forward. That's a big deal. The compliance and stuff is a huge part of this process, and we take it very seriously. And there's a lot of other eyes looking at this too. It's not just me looking at everything. It's attorneys, it's legislative entities. There's a lot of eyes on this. So when it comes to the key items in this agreement, I did post a link on there in case you'd like to do some light reading of the Ohio Revised Code. To see the required language that has to be in every single enterprise zone agreement in the state of Ohio. Now, every county can add stuff to it, but they can't take anything out of it that's required. So kind of going into what's in the actual agreement itself, we have a very detailed project description where we have the parcel numbers, the phases, if that applies, the investment numbers, everything about the project, every detail to the nitty gritty is listed there. Required language about compliance, that takes up the majority of an enterprise zone agreement, where it goes through, here's the legal consequences if you falsify information, if you don't file your taxes, if you don't do all these things. I mean, there's legal consequences to these things, which again is that compliance piece. That's why it takes up such a large part of the enterprise zone agreement itself. Fun to read. So the terms of the agreement, I kind of mentioned this earlier. So there are terms to every enterprise zone agreement. For this one, we're proposing 100% abatement for 10 years. Now, that means you have to fill in your school. You have to make your schools whole. So a percentage of the projected savings are negotiated annually and donated back to the school as the taxes are picked up. So
It's 15, you said 10.
Oh, my apologies. 100% for 15 years.
Yes.
Thank you for correcting me. I'm thinking too many things. So in this case, we have 4% donation to Fort County schools, 35% donation to North Central, and there's also an additional percent to the Williams County Infrastructure Fund. Now, this being said, as we add up those percentages, yeah, they're getting 100% abatement, but really they're only getting a 60% abatement because they're donating 40% to all of these different entities, which is a good thing. It's good for the schools, good for the community, and the company likes that they're cutting a private check to you guys. It's really a win-win for everyone involved. With that being said, I did want to touch on the reason why I had 10 stuck in my head. I did want to touch on, for those who may be watching, just some education about the enterprise zone agreements. You can go up to 10 years at 75%, but then you don't include your school districts. So really, this is, the company gets a couple more years, the school gets the percentage donated directly to them. And with that, there's not strings attached for you guys because it's a private donation from company to school. And that's how every single tax abatement works. So a little bit about the reason I have, it's kind of small in here. For this project specifically, you know, it's almost a 500,000 square foot building. So the build out's going to take some time. So with that being said, we're looking at this in phases. So we hope to start construction in November of 2021, which will be about a $2 million site preparation that will be going on at the site. 2022, we'll have phase 2, which is about a $50 million, 214, I believe, thousand square foot building addition. And once they get that up and going, they actually can start to bring some of the eggs in and start the growing process. So they have their FDA regulations that they have to follow for their facility in order to do that. But it's kind of a step-by-step process of get it building, get it going, keep adding on. So it'll kind of be continuous construction is what we're expecting. And that last phase is a $48 million phase for the rest of the facility. So as we see this impacts how the taxes are picked up. So I'll go on to the next slide real quick. So this is kind of what it looks like when we have multiple phases. And I just, to clarify for you all, we do have a couple of other agreements on the books that have functioned in the same way. So this isn't anything new. One of the Menards agreements, it's actually one fell off this year, but the other part is still going. So when we look at it in phases, it really depends on how it's picked up by the commercial auditors. So we see that phase 1 and phase 2, it might be picked up together. And that's contingent on, you know, the construction schedule. Did they stick to their actual schedule? We all know sometimes that just doesn't happen with the construction crews and stuff that you're working with, or if weather is bad and if it delays construction, you know, phase 1 might not start till 2022 if the weather's bad. So keeping those contingency things in mind, phase 1 and phase 2 might be picked up together, but it might not be. So this is kind of the schedule of what it looks like. You see the phases are each 15 years. So it really depends on the construction schedule, what that exactly is going to look like. And over the past couple of weeks, actually recently, we just changed kind of the amounts for each phase because I had the numbers for each amount for each phase, and then we switched it to the lump sums. The lump sum stayed the same, which that's what's important to you guys. That's what's important for the tax abatement process. So I didn't have the breakdown by phase this time, but timing wise, this is what it looks like. We also, you know, keep you guys updated, you know, the construction schedule, if anything changes, you know, that depends on when things are picked up. Now, the auditor picks the value up when the construction's 50% or more done. So once it hits that 50% on January 1st, hits that 51%, then the auditor will start that phase. So we have very close communication with the commercial auditor, the Williams County Auditor's Office, when it comes to picking up the tax value for projects. So one thing I did want to mention, and we'll look at it when we go to the estimates on the next slide, but keep in mind, you know,
For the next one?
yeah, we can just go to the next one. Yeah. So when it comes to the estimates, the most important thing to you guys. So like I said, on paper, you know, the company does get 100% tax payment, but they're paying out 40% of the savings. So it's only really a 60% tax abatement. Then the building improvements, so in the application, we have them put in there, you know, what's your minimum estimated real property investment? What's your estimated maximum real property investment? In this case, we get all our estimates based on that minimum because we want to be conservative with our estimates. But keep in mind that $100 million building investment, that's if the $100 million is the appraised value. Now, typically what we've seen and from conversations with the auditors, typically it comes in a little bit lower than what, you know, our guess is on paper. The value comes in a little lower, but we're hoping the investment is higher than they expect. So we'll be closer to the estimate. But again, we call estimates for a reason. We're doing it based on educated information, the best investment information that we have for the company. But keep in mind that sometimes things change, construction schedules change, prices go up, values go up and values go down. You have to keep all these things in mind. So these are educated estimates. So looking at, based on that 35% donation at $100 million for the real property investment appraisal, we're looking about just under $11 million donation over 15 years to North Central schools. Now, when we break down that annual amount, when the building is 100% complete, Now keep in mind those first phases and those first years it's picked up, it's gonna waver a little bit. And also when it drops off, because you'll have one dropping off and one still going. So keep that in mind. But all in all, when everything's built out, kind of in those midsection years, we're looking at about a $726,000 annual donation. So even if it comes in less than that, you're looking at $700,000 a year, conservatively, if you want to, think about it on a lesser value. So something else. So as I talked about a little bit before, the required donations: 4% to Ford County, 35% to North Central, 1% to the infrastructure fund. That's a requirement of every single enterprise zone agreement in Williams County because of the new program that was put in place. So this isn't unique just for this company, it's across the board. Everyone's treated the same. Something else I do want to point out that we've had some good conversations with a couple of school board members and Bill. So something else about this project that's unique just because of the size of the project. So when your payroll is over that $1 million threshold, something you have to address is income tax revenue sharing. Now, we haven't had to address this for any project so far, so that's been kind of nice. So the Village of Pioneer has a 1% income tax rate, which means at full capacity, when we're picking up the 112 jobs, 5.4 million payroll, the village is going to collect just over $50,000. So the income tax revenue sharing, that's where that comes to play. So the reason why that law was put into place was really to help schools that aren't fairly compensated through their donation agreements. So schools can ask for 50% of the income tax revenue sharing, so the income tax that goes to the village. Now, Ohio law allows the village or whatever municipality to claim up to 35% of that funding to recoup infrastructure costs that they have to put into place to make a project happen. So then by the time you dwindle that down, cut that into 50% because that's the maximum a school is allowed to ask for. It doesn't amount to much. It's a few $1,000s. In this case, when the negotiation process, we'd rather negotiate a higher number of 35% rather than go after these funds from the village. Something else you can also do in these agreements, which is why it's better to waive this if it comes about. The village can also provide services in place of goods. So they can provide in-kind services, which I know you guys have a good relationship with the Village of Pioneer, and to keep these things going, we figured this is the best route to take. Really thank you guys for helping move this forward. We don't usually have to talk about this too often. It's put in place to help schools that aren't treated fairly in the negotiation process. And we strongly believe we have a very fair process, and what we negotiate for our schools is very generous compared to some of our other counties, which is what we want. We want our schools to be made as close to whole as possible and have that strong relationship with our businesses. So I just wanted to address that with you all because we don't typically have to talk about that. But I want to thank you guys. We've talked a lot about this. We've talked about the relationship that school has with the village. We want to keep that growing strong and help encourage that partnership throughout the years. So I think I've covered, let's see. Yeah, I think I've covered everything.
More slides?
Yeah, no more slides. Just if you guys have any questions, obviously we've got the papers all in front of us, but I'd like to ask you to support this agreement to move this forward and help us move forward in a timely manner by waiving that 45-day waiting period. That's kind of standard for every agreement to help companies move a little bit quickly. So at this time, I know I've talked a lot. I haven't paid attention to the time, so I really appreciate you guys staying attentive.
Not that I was counting.
I forgot to look, but I know I shared a lot of information in a short amount of time with you guys, but I really wanted to try and touch on everything, not leave any stone unturned for you guys.
No, I appreciate that. I was just kidding.
We're in it. Any questions?
If you think of anything later too, please feel free to reach out to me anytime.
Okay, treasurer's report. Need a motion to approve the resolution to table approval of the minutes from the August 10th, 2021 meeting. Do I hear a motion? A motion by Shane, do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Tim? Call the roll, Mr. Smelter?
Anthony,
Yes.
Homer,
Yes.
Tim,
Yes.
Shane. Yes. Lee.
Yes.
Next, we need a resolution to approve the economic development, acknowledgement, waiver, support, and school donation agreement with Aqua Bounty Farms. This also includes the 45-day waiver notice. 35% of the project tax savings will be the donation to the school. Do I hear a motion? Anthony, second.
I'll second.
Second by Lee. Any question, comment? I'll ask this time. Call roll, please.
Homer,
Yes.
Tim,
Yes.
Shane,
Yes.
Lee,
Yes.
Anthony.
Yes.
If there's nothing else, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Have a motion by Tim. Is that your second?
Yep.
Shane? I know there's no comment, so call roll, please.
Tim,
Yes.
Shane,
Yes.
Lee,
Yes.
Anthony,
Yes.
Homer.
Yes,
7:05.
thank you, Mr. Smelter. And thank you all.